Had the Privacy Amendment Notification of Serious Data Breaches Bill been enacted, it would have introduced mandatory data breach notification provisions for serious data breaches, compelling agencies, organisations and certain other entities regulated by the Privacy Act to notify the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner and affected individuals of serious data breaches. A serious data breach would have been deemed to have occurred in instances where specified kinds of personal information was the subject of unauthorised access, disclosure or loss at the hands of a regulated entity, and those instances resulted in a real risk of serious harm to the individual. For example, if a telecommunication industry systems were compromised by unauthorised access to and disclosure of customers' personal information, this might constitute a serious data breach if it resulted in a real risk of serious harm. So how would harm have been assessed if the bill had been passed? Entities would have had to consider the nature of the harm to the individual, whether the information could be used for identity theft or fraud, or cause physical harm, humiliation, damage to reputation, loss of business or employment opportunities. Using our example, the unauthorised access and disclosure of that information could cause serious harm to customers recovering from domestic violence if their names, addresses and silent line telephone numbers were published alongside other personal information, because their violent ex-partners could gain access to that information and use it to stalk or to terrorise those individuals. If the bill was made law, what actions would entities have had to take in response to a serious data breach? If an entity was aware or ought reasonably to be aware that there are reasonable grounds to believe that there was a serious data breach, it would have been obligated to, as soon as practicable, prepare a statement notifying the OAIC and the individuals to whom the relevant information relates. It would also be compelled to publish and publicise the contents of the statement via channels applicable to that entity, for example by taking out print or online advertisements. To use our example, the telecommunications company may not be immediately aware that their systems were compromised, nor that a list of customers' personal information had been published and made accessible to all on the internet. But if there were reasonable grounds leading them to become aware of the serious data breach through a series of complaints or other credible forms of evidence, they would be obliged to reasonably assess the severity of the data breach within 30 days of becoming aware. And if it could be determined with certainty that there had been a serious data breach, the telecommunications company would be compelled to notify the OAIC and its impacted customers. The bill, if passed, would have provided some exceptions. In certain circumstances, an entity would have been able to make an application to the Commissioner for an exemption on public interest grounds. For example, in cases where notifying an individual could compromise law enforcement or intelligence operations, the entity would then only have had to provide notification to the Commissioner. Currently, security of personal information is regulated under the Australian Privacy Principles. APP 11 requires that regulated entities take reasonable steps to protect personal information held by them from unauthorised interference. Further, APP 11 impliedly places an obligation on the regulated entity to detect data breaches. But until the relevant amendments are enacted under privacy law, notification is voluntary and regulated entities, at their discretion, may choose to notify the OAIC and affected individuals of a serious data breach.
Created using Powtoon.